Okay, so my experience of doing these things is that I start talking and then people join. So I'm gonna start talking and see if anybody joins. And the purpose of this is that I'm talking about, and that's the thing that I always remember. Once I start talking, I need water. The purpose of this is to try and just talk around and the conclusion to my book, Delivering the Impossible, and to try and come up with some kind of gloss, some kind of wisdom, some kind of way of wrapping up all the things that I talk about. And I've started to do this in a written conclusion, but I just thought I'd knock it about a bit. And the kind of the idea that I'm sort of getting at, starting to come to, is that I talk about six different ways of seeing. Hello, Ted. I can't hear you, and maybe you're not talking. Okay. No. Oh dear.
Yeah, I'm talking.
All
Hello?
right. Yeah, that's better. How are you?
Well, I'm hungry actually,
Okay.
but I've decided that, oh, I like you've got a Matisse there. It's nice.
Yes, I do. Yes. It's uh normally in shot. If I'm in London, then it's in shot. It's behind me on my peculiar large cupboard as well. Where are you?
Amazing, isn't it? You know, that is a Matisse.
Why?
Well, I'm just thinking about it. I mean, and it's beautiful.
It is, yeah. Have you seen the original in it's in the Tate. It's enormous. It's about 3 meters by 3 meters.
I think depends how long it's been in the Tate. It's been a while since I've been to the Tate. So,
Um I think it's part of their permanent collection. So I think it's there most of the time.
oh right,
Um,
okay. Yeah, yeah.
and what I find is that it's if you see it in reality, it's very, very cheerful, is my kind of experience of it. That kind of orange on a really
Oh, it's
big
just
scale is
yeah, but it's like it's interesting how it's so instantly recognizable.
yeah, it is.
You know, it's not Jenny's school project like when she was 10.
No. Yeah, and it is just colored squares of paper, which is like it's pretty amazing. Okay, where are you? You look like you're in a cabin
I
in the
am. I'm
woods
in a
somewhere.
shed.
Yeah, all right.
I'm in a sort of quite substantial man cave, to be honest,
Fantastic.
in the woods in Herefordshire.
Ah, right, okay. Yeah, that's where you live, isn't it? Yeah, you live in the countryside. I'd forgotten that. I don't really go to the countryside very much. Um, yeah, so the purpose of this, and we can wrap up by 2:30, and then you can go and eat something, is it's basically like I've written this book, um, and I've written 9 chapters worth of stuff, and now I need a conclusion. And I'm starting to write the conclusion. As soon as I talk, I get a frog in my throat. I'm starting to write the conclusion. And basically, this is the kind of way I'm trying to craft the conclusion, is that I think these 9 chapters, there's a straightforward first half to these 9 chapters, which is 6 different ways of seeing that I talk about. So I talk about seeing things in terms of value streams, and the fact that with new software development projects, the value stream doesn't exist. You have to kind of construct it. I talk about project management, software development happening, being like in a swamp where there are lots of complex things going on in terms of the terrain and the geography, but also ownership and regulation. So you're trying to do things in a complex space. I talk about projects being like a car, and empirical methods of control, that you have to look out the window, you have to pay attention, you have to modify what you do in light of what you can see out of the window. So it's not just you set a destination and off you go. You have to change what you do in life. Then there's a chapter called Chapter Ship, which is about having the idea that kind of if you spot problems on the horizon, you should deal with them, basically. So kind of if there's a long preamble into this chapter, but basically the idea is that if you see things coming towards you that are problematic, you should mention them. And
Don't smash into icebergs in the dark.
yes, exactly. And then there's a chapter, these aren't in order, I just made a note of them, but there's a chapter called Chapter Bet, which is basically saying projects are bets. There's a non-zero chance of them failing. And a lot of the behavior that goes on around projects is actually trying to cover that up, the fact that there's a non-zero chance of them failing. But ironically, there are things that you can do to make them to really improve the chances of the bet paying off that very often you'll encounter resistance for, because the fact that you're doing these things kind of highlights the fact that it's a bet.
Yeah, you're always
Yeah,
trading certainty for value somehow. It's like,
yeah,
if you want certainty, well, don't bother starting the project in the first place.
yeah. That's
And
a really
certainty doesn't protect you from the risk of failure.
no.
Yeah.
So that
Anyway, yeah.
yeah, that's a very good way of expressing it. And then the final one, although as I said, these aren't in order, is escape, which is basically saying you need to let this software get out. You need to get it out to the point where it interacts with the people who are finally going to use it. And that sounds like it's a one-shot thing. It's like either it's out or it's not out. But the process of pushing it towards getting it out towards the final users with real data on the real servers, every kind of move you make towards doing that teaches you more about how hard it is to do that, and also kind of
Oh yeah.
and teaches you about different things in that environment. So you might get something all the way to real users, but it's not using real data, or you might get something using real data to just some users, but they're not really the users that you need to. They're internal users. They're not actually the end users. So these are kind of 6 different ways of seeing. And what I realized is that, kind of I start to ask my question, why am I talking about these things? Why am I talking about these ways of seeing? And what I realized is that for each of these 6 ways, there's a kind of shadow way of seeing. There's a kind of thought which I'm fighting against. And so I've kind of started to make explicit what those thoughts are that I'm fighting against and why I'm kind of advocating this particular way of seeing. So, for example, for stream, the idea that I'm kind of fighting against is, well, once we've had the idea, all you have to do is assemble the bits. It's not as if there's any kind of further bit of discovery. I know you're laughing but it's
No, 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 no.
but
I like it. No, I'm not. It's just I like it when things get articulated. So it makes me smile.
yeah. So there is this kind of thinking that kind of, and you hear this kind of just and only and merely, you hear those words. It's like
Yeah.
we have the idea, so all you have to do now is assemble the bits. All you have to do. And so what I'm saying in chapter stream is no, that's not the case. You have to actually forge this new value stream, which is a non-trivial thing to do. The chapter swap
Yes.
is, sorry, carry on. You were going to say.
Yeah. No, I'm just sorry. I
Yeah.
love it. I mean, I loved the idea of the book when you first floated it as like metaphors about agile
Yeah.
because I work a lot in the metaphorical landscape at the moment. So
Yeah.
I just find it really interesting and stimulating.
Thank you. And so the idea with the swamp is basically Similarly, it's very similar to streaming in some ways, is the idea that you can do what you want in this space and you will be unhindered. So kind of you can develop whatever software you want. You won't encounter residents of this space who are very angry that you're doing this software. You won't encounter people who regard this space as their own and don't want you to do anything there. There won't be any people a million miles away from your project who you've never met, who are regulators, who are going to have opinions about whether you can do your project or not. That's the kind of assumption that, like, it's a green field and you're uninhibited. That's the assumption I'm fighting against. Um, as I said
Yeah,
when I talked
yeah. I get it. Yeah, I like that one. Yeah, I like.
um, so for example, I worked on a project where um, as a result of one conversation, this was a short-term loan website, and as a result of one conversation that the chap who was the chief executive of this organization had, he decided he didn't need any regulatory approval for a loan site. And so at some point, the whatever they were called then, the Financial Conduct Authority turned up and said, "You have to fill in this form. It's a 6-month approval process." And that is just so his idea was, this will be an uninhibited space. Nobody will have any regulatory issues with me lending money to people online. Um,
Because it's
so
online.
the car one is a bit like, it's one of these things where it's the actual kind of the naive idea or the kind of like shadow idea is actually it is very similar to the stream one. It's just basically once we know where we're going, we can go there. We won't have to kind of modify what we do in any way. Just the hard work and the heavy lifting is figuring out where we need to go. And then once we've done that, we can go there. We won't have to slow down, speed up, change the direction, change where we're going is the other thing as well. So, and then the ship one, the way I wrote this is like deliberately provocative because it looks so silly if you write it down like this, which is the project will have no problems.
Mhm.
And you'd say, well, this is insane. Everything that you do encounters problems. But then when you work on projects, what you find is that the extremely negative reaction to pointing out problems and very often just ignoring it,
Yeah,
it's like this is actually the premise that people appear to be acting from,
yeah,
is that the project will have no problems. If you make it explicit like that, it sounds bonkers.
yeah. And then if the project, and then especially if the people who have that perspective, right,
Yeah.
tend to have influence and control and power, and when the project does have problems, they take it personally,
Yes.
which is really unhelpful for the project.
Well, I think that interestingly, that's kind of built into the fact if you some of these other ones I've talked about, if the idea, so one of the things I talk about when I talk about streams in the chapter is the value stream that results in an idea getting funded is often completely opaque to the people who've been asked to do it. So how this thing got funded, why this particular idea got picked, is that's not a discussion that you get party to.
Yeah. It's kind of, you're just like, great, there's money. Let's not ask any more questions.
And so, but then once you kind of start on the journey and you say, well, we've encountered this problem, this problem, this problem, and what do you want us to do about this? And this isn't clear, so we need a steer on this. That can be interpreted as just insolence, threatening behavior. It's kind of potential dangers to the people who had the idea in the first place.
Mm.
And so that like kind of saying this, like articulating it as the project has no problem makes it crazy. But essentially what one of the things that I talk about in that chapter is like uh, and actually in a later chapter as well, is it just figuring out ways of coming up with essentially seducing people into thinking about the problems that a project has without threatening their status and without causing them to run away. So,
Yeah.
so it's like, well, very gently pointing out, like, this is what we thought would happen. This is what's actually happening. And so like actually there's a bunch of stuff in Agile where this happens, like so show and tell, and also um
I could feel a second book coming on, Mark.
I mean I think it's that's kind of what's going on with chapter ship.
Right.
And
Right.
I talked about bets. Again, this is kind of we just talked about this earlier, but it's the idea of kind of absolute certainty that like this project is certain to succeed. That's the kind of crazy statement there. This project is certain to succeed. Nothing, kind of nearly nothing is certain to succeed. Um, I have an extra chapter in here that is kind of part of the way it's seen about bets, but I've actually put an extra chapter in because one of the things I wanted to make clear is some projects are guaranteed to fail. There's there is sufficient risk that has been built into the way that this project works that as it stands, it will not succeed.
Yes, absolutely.
And one of the things that I kind of realize, I got this idea when working on a particular government project. Um, the basic idea is, I think, or one way I explain it to myself is like the three nonsenses. So it's like if you have one thing that makes no sense, and most projects have a crazy deadline and they have a budget and deadline restriction that doesn't really make sense. If you have that, then that's bad, but you can probably negotiate around it. If you also are kind of somehow hampering the people who do the development by insisting on them using a technology that doesn't work, or in some other way, kind of like preventing them from doing what they need to do, not giving them access to the environments they need to work on, or something like that. That's another thing. If by the time you get to a third thing, so if you've done something, and again, these are all real examples, if you've done something like forbid the team to talk to the people who know how the thing actually works, then
If only that was the only thing that you'd done.
but it's like three crazy things in a line like that.
Yeah.
That means there is a vanishingly small chance of this project paying off. If you add on to that like another couple of things, and there are many projects that are like this, then it is a dead cert, but it's a dead cert to fail. It's not, it's
Oh
not
yeah.
kind of like it's not that this project is guaranteed to succeed, this project is guaranteed to fail.
Yeah.
And then the final one, the escape thing, the kind of shadow statement is nobody needs to see this until it's finished. Um, and
Oh, and yeah, wow. That's a massive, you pick up that stone and you just what is underneath that? Oh my God. Oh dear.
and one of the things about that one is I think I can see kind of political reasons why you might want a project to be officially live, even if there are massive problems with it. And so you don't want people to see it. I can see kind of, I mean, like, there are there are political reasons why you might want that to happen. And then the question is, do you actually care at all whether this succeeds in the end or not?
Yes.
Because if you do, then a lot of the things I say about this is like, well, you can still do this. It's like, oh, we don't need to be showing this to anybody until it's finished. Yeah, but we can still show it to people internally. We can still, oh, this is live data. It's too sensitive to like kind of be putting out in a beta. Yes, okay, but we can still, can we fake that data up so it looks like the real data?
Yeah,
There's,
yes.
we don't want to spend money on a server until we're launching because it's expensive. It's £2,000. It's like,
That's all right. Don't worry, let's just hope, shall we? Because hope is free.
sorry, hang on a minute, Ted.
Or
Uh, Um, so those are the kind of six things. And then
I like that you've got a shadow thing
yeah,
in there. That's really nice. That
and
kind of gives it, yeah, it's
and
nice.
it's only recently come to me that. And then the final three chapters, and I think maybe this is what I have to do. I have to talk about them all three together. The final three chapters are a chapter on commitment and consistency, a chapter on this thing called summon all, which is I'll explain that a bit in a second, and then a final chapter called chapter boss. Um, and the commitment and consistency chapter. The interesting thing about this is that the kind of shadow is so kind of all pervasive that it's very difficult to talk about what the opposite of that shadow is. I haven't really come up with anything that is a kind of way of seeing that isn't this kind of all pervasive. It's like so commitment and consistency is like a major, powerful driver of human behavior.
Yeah, that's
Non-committal
interesting.
inconsistency doesn't say it's very difficult to kind of
Well,
set
it's
up.
very interesting. So you just reminded me of something that I did back in whenever it was when I was working in Australia.
Right.
I was like, and I was in testing at the time,
Yeah.
and I was enthusiastic about agility because it would essentially make my job easier
Yeah.
and more, actually more, what's the word? Satisfying because I wouldn't be
Yeah.
doing mindless, pointless. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So,
Yeah.
but I wrote a white paper on um, who cares, right? So I did this little white paper on it's like these are all the people in the project. Now, before we start actually doing, who actually cares about this thing? And so I did this little, where you end up with a little spider diagram at the end where you
Mhm.
find out. So, you get a thing called a care factor.
Right.
And so I was like, who cares? So, do the testers care? Do the developers care? Do the people, to the level of anybody cares about the actual outcome of the project?
Yeah.
You just reminded me of that kind of, because
Yeah.
you need that. Because if
You,
somebody
yeah.
important doesn't care, doesn't matter really what you do.
No.
Almost, you can't compensate for somebody else's lack of interest.
And I think that's that. So like people talk a lot about user research, and I've got no problem with user research at all. What people don't talk about, because it's nearly impossible to do explicitly and publicly, is organizational research. So it's
Oh
like,
yeah,
so it's like, where are we in the structure? What is the significance of doing this for the organization? Why, as I said, like, kind of very often, why it's being funded is just opaque. What, so we're being told that we have to do it for this particular date, and it has to be this kind of particular functionality. Is that right? Is that, is there something else that would be like much less than that that could really help the organization? Like, so those kind of organizational values and that organizational structure, which is what you're talking about, who cares? Very often, what I've kind of realized on the projects I've worked on that have been successful is by doing the user research, you unearth a lot of this structure, and then things start to make sense that didn't make sense, that just did not make any sense at all at the beginning. And if you don't manage to do that, if you don't manage to unearth that structure, then you are really struggling, even if you do exactly what you were asked to do.
yeah.
It's just that in itself is not any kind of guarantee. So commitment and consistency. Um, what I try and say in that chapter is what you want to do, and this is something that's in the kind of very much in the kind of uh, Agile Manifesto, is you want to move away from whatever list of things that we're committed to towards doing something which is genuinely valuable for the organization and genuinely valuable for the users. And a lot of the time, the kind of game I find I'm playing in real projects is there is all this kind of talk about commitment and consistency and delivering on time and stuff, right up to the point where you actually manage to connect with something that's genuinely valuable. And then at the point where you've got something that is actually genuinely valuable to the organization more than to the users, but it depends on the structure, then the whole thing kind of shifts, because then you're in this kind of setup where you're delivering value. And then whether it's, there'll still be a lot of chatter about whether it's the thing you committed to or not, but you're delivering value. So so that's a completely different discussion.
And then you find out who it is in the organization doesn't actually want that value to be delivered.
Yeah, exactly. So you will get all that kind of non-functional requirements and all the rest of it. But I mean,
yes.
an example of this that I give in the book is that I worked on a project where, so I'll try and anonymize the government organization as much as possible. But basically, it was an administrative tool for administrators in a government organization. And our product owner had been one of these senior administrators. And when we had a very, very stripped down version of this product, she said, "Can you put that on a laptop so that I can take it around and show it to the other administrators?" And we said, "Yeah, sure, we can do that." As a matter of fact, we only have it on laptops because you haven't given us a server, but that's an entirely different discussion. But yeah, sure, we can do that. And so what she did was she then she went on the road and talked to various kind of senior administrators around the country who she knew were influential. And they weren't talking to us as the supplier. They weren't talking to the people who'd commissioned it. They were talking to somebody who actually knew what their job was. And the result was they came back with, the inevitable question, when can we have this? When can this go live? And then a lot of the problems we'd had around kind of, can you stump up for some servers? They started to dissolve. And the reason was because the pull was coming now from inside the organization, and people inside the organization were saying, well, what do you mean this can't be rolled out? Because you're arguing with them about who should pay for the servers. And so it's a completely different kind of dynamic. And so the thing in the commitment and consistency is that, that the opposite of commitment and consistency, and I've just realized this talking to you, the opposite of commitment and consistency is pull. And they don't sound like they should be opposites, right? Because one of them is delivering a list of things on a sheet that you've promised, and the other one is actually connecting with real value that people want. They feel like kind of apples and giraffes, really, but that is actually the opposite, is pull. There's two final chapters, but one of them is this thing that I talk about, which might be on it. Relax, Matt. It might be by itself nearly a whole book, which is this idea that I talk about. A really quick way of explaining this. Let's just say that there are two ways of looking at the world. One is all, same, and forever. And the other one is some, different, and for a short space of time. There's a guy who wrote a book, nothing to do with project management. There's a guy who wrote a book in the 60s who was a psychoanalyst and psychologist. And the point that he makes in that book is that unconsciously we favor the all, same, and forever way of looking at the world. That's the way we start. When we see something, we want it to be forever, we want it to be the same, we tend to think of it as the all. And there's another aspect. He talks about these two different ways of seeing as being symmetric and asymmetric. And he has a whole bunch of terrifying logic, like actual logical symbols to kind of, in terms of thinking about this in terms of sets, which I don't really understand. But another aspect of this is that this symmetrical way of seeing kind of intuitively and subconsciously thinks that whatever can be described can absolutely match the world. So you can have a description of something and it will match the world. There'll be a one-to-one match between what's said, what's written down, what's thought, and the world. And the asymmetric view is to think that, the French thing, ceci n'est pas un pipe. This is not a pipe. A picture of a pipe is not the pipe. Right? That there's that that a description of something or the way you imagine something is never going to be exactly the same. And these two ways of seeing the world, and the fact that one of them is unconscious, and so it's probably the one that we go to first rather than the one that is kind of requires more effort. What I say in this chapter is basically this explains so much about the problems that we encounter in project management that people essentially devote enormous amounts of energy to showing that what has been done matches what has been described and imagined. Why? Why is that a value? Why do we care about that? Surely the thing that's important is that whatever we've got is actually valuable. And the other thing is, it just explains one of the most basic things, the problems you have if you're a project manager. If you say to people who have paid for the project, who want the project to happen, we've got 10 things here. Can you possibly prioritize them for us? They say, no, I want all of them. And in a way, by starting to think about things in terms of symmetry and asymmetry, I have more sympathy for that view, because essentially what that view is saying is, I haven't thought about it much. I haven't thought about it consciously. I don't want to have to think about it. And so I'm just going to tell you all of them, because if I start to prioritize them, well, there's a subtle thing here that is which is kind of one of the weirdest things about this, which is in that view, that kind of symmetrical view, essentially anything that's thought of already exists in some sense. And that comes back to some things that we talked about earlier on, about when we talked about the stream and the idea of things having no problems, that once you've got the idea, there is some way that this project already exists, that this thing exists. And all you're paying these people for is to really just like assemble the IKEA flat pack. There's no effort here, kind of. But I don't want to push on that one too much. But the kind of, when you start to think about this symmetrical thing, you can then go back and look at all of the things that I've talked about before and this kind of shadow way of seeing, and see that a lot of the problems that this shadow way of seeing has are to do with this kind of symmetrical way of thinking. There's an exact match between the idea and the reality.
Oh, yeah, right. Look, it's not possible for such a thing to be the case. It just isn't. But anyway,
Yeah.
that's why, you can't. A description is a description. It's not the thing itself.
That's absolutely true. It's a very, very difficult thing to explain to people.
It's your best attempt. It's your best shot at something.
And I think that's one of the values of things like show and tells, and actually giving software to people and then observing them using it, is that rather than saying to people, look, this thing that will be valuable is not a perfect reflection of this description, no matter how detailed that you gave us. The thing that will be valuable is the thing that makes people want to press on the button. And when they press on the button, they say, well, when I pressed on this button, I expected it to do this and it didn't do that. And if it did do that, I'd be very happy and I'd probably buy this. Or if it did do that, it'd make my job much easier and
Oh
all the
God,
rest of it.
stop. I'm gonna go because you got yeah, got it. Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, sure.
So I'm interested in the conclusion,
Yeah.
and I'm curious about. I mean, I'm wondering. I'm wondering if it is even possible to have a conclusion, and
Yeah. The
what kind
conclusion
of.
I have, sorry, I
Yeah, no,
interrupted
that's
you.
all right. No, that's all right.
The conclusion I have is that all of the all of the tactics that it's basically about tactics. The general strategy is if all of these problems occur from people thinking about things symmetrically, which I think they do. So they think in terms of all, they think of the kind of the all and forever. The forever thing is that once we've thought of it, it already exists.
Yeah,
Um, and same the kind of idea that kind of like this thing should be the thing should be the same as the description. Then what are we doing? This is kind of like this is something that kind of the Toyota guru Taiichi Ono said. He said that you should always be asking yourself, what is it? What is the problem that you're actually solving? And I think the problem that we're solving is trying to seduce people into thinking about things in terms of some and different and for a short space of time rather than same and all and forever. And the good news is there are ways of doing that, right? So as I said when I talked about um, creating pull, that if you can actually get things into the hands of users, that completely changes the dynamic. So that very often radically moves the thing from all to some. So it's like, as I said, like if you show users something, they very often will say, well, this would be fine, but when I press this button, this needs to happen. Then that's focusing on some. And so a lot of the things that we do in Agile, the show and tell stuff and the putting things out into the real world and putting things in the hands of users, my conclusion is I think I know what we're doing. I suppose that's what my conclusion is. I think I know what we're doing when we're doing those things. And what we're doing is we're we're kind of helping people because tricking and manipulating are bad words. We're helping people see things in terms of some and different and for a short space of time. But it's interesting that English really struggles with the opposite of forever. It's like, it's like forever is a really nice, straightforward concept. The opposite of that, like temporary for a short space of time, they're all kind of somehow unsatisfactory, but that's kind of what we're doing is we're kind of so people start to see, I think, like there is something about like once you start to kind of have a kind of cycle of updates on a piece of software, people start to see what the kind of the arc is of like from going to an idea to actually having it turn up in the software. Um and and one of the things that I've noticed is if you can kind of articulate that, if you can say, well, from the point when, in on this piece of software, from the point when we have the idea to the point where it can turn up in the software, the fastest that can happen, if it's not a text change or something, is say 6 weeks. Then one of the things that you start to see is people thinking in terms of some rather than all and saying, well, okay, so if it's 6 weeks for that, if we put this in, then could we have this next? And so like this is kind of what you're trying to do. And the interesting thing is that so much of what's talked about in projects is unhelpful, basically, because a lot of what's talked about is in terms of absolutely matching requirements, delivering on delivering on commitments, and none of that stuff is helpful. What's also unhelpful, this is what I've realized after doing it for way too long, is arguing with any of that. It's like just kind of
Yeah,
it
yeah,
just
yeah,
doesn't
yeah.
work.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
So I think what we're doing is, in to come back to Taichi Ono, what is it? Project management for software development, I think, is creating opportunities for people to think about things in terms of some and different. And for now, against a kind of background of all and forever and same, I think that's actually what's going on. Do you think
Mm.
that's enough of a conclusion?
Yes,
Yeah.
because my sense is that, um, but also my sense is that um, you don't want too much in a conclusion.
No.
It's like, and you will know this one, which is Wittgenstein.
Yes.
You know where he, because I think you referenced it actually in LinkedIn at some point. But it's like,
Yes.
you know, um, whereof,
We cannot speak, we must be silent. Yeah.
yeah, thereon we must remain silent. So I was like, that's quite a nifty conclusion. But so I just my sense is that if your conclusion is something like you've got forever, I don't remember what they are, but you've got
All
the
same and forever.
all same and forever, and then you've got bits change and like temporary
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
ideas. I
Yeah.
think that is a conclusion, and it also sets you up for future conversation.
Okay.
And I'm also wondering if are you thinking of it as a conclusion? Is it titled a conclusion? I mean, I'm just wondering about the word
Yeah.
conclusion because
Well, I mean, that's what it's titled at the moment. Yeah.
right, okay,
Um, I th so like the guy that kind of very kindly reads the stuff that I write. He was saying you need some kind of call to action, and that's the bit that I'm kind of struggling with a little bit. But I think because I think like the thing is though, like it's like what sort of thing is a call to action? Do you want it to be something that sounds like kind of really kind of white, kind of like broad um and kind of all encompassing, but that's a kind of all same forever type thing? Or do you want it to be kind of something that says, well, actually, the way to kind of do better at this, kind of, the title of the book is Delivering the Impossible. So it's like taking something that is impossible and making it possible.
yeah,
Um, and the answer to doing that is to do in situations where people are talking about all, talk about something. Kind of like well, in situations where people are thinking about all,
yeah,
maneuver them into thinking about something. So and
yeah,
all you will always get resistance for this. If you say, can we release this? People will always say no.
yeah,
If you say, well, can we do a bit of this? Which bit should we do? They say, I can't think about which bit to do. You should do it all.
yeah.
But then if you say, well, actually, then we'll do this bit, they say, oh no, don't do that bit. So it is this kind of weird dance.
Well, so uh, where are we? Right. So I'm going to ask you about a call to action now.
Okay.
So my question is, did you write the book with a call to action in mind?
I think like I've sort of realized that the call to action I had in mind was essentially don't see things in these kind of shadow ways. It's like like imagining that like once you've had the idea, then like
Yeah,
Don't do that. You're not imagining that kind of you won't have any problems.
So, for example,
Don't do it.
if I was to read your book, right,
Yeah.
and I get to the end of it, what I've essentially done is make a contribution and engage with the ideas that you wanted to
Yeah.
kind of put out. And so, call to action then is entirely up to me. What am I going to do with that information? Because it sounds very rich. And if you and kind of trying to pull out a single call to action or two or three,
Mm.
just I'm like, I don't want to do that. I want to read the book.
Yeah.
I want to read it because you know I work in this domain. I like this metaphorical approach. I can pick one. I can go, yes. Oh, what if I might come up with my own metaphor. I
Hmm.
might start to. So it encourages a certain kind of thinking.
Yeah.
I think just from the sound of it, obviously I haven't read a
Yeah.
single word of it, but from the sound of it, you're kind of encouraging a certain kind of thinking that isn't about a call to action or isn't specifically about, you know, this
Yeah.
outcome. It's more about, well, actually, this is complex and we need various ways to think about this complex domain. We're not trying to solve the complexity,
Yeah.
but we need ideas about how and here are some of them. And I'm like, yeah, I
Yeah.
like these ideas. It's like, great.
Yeah.
Because um what's it? I was just gonna uh there was like um so this is my favorite book.
Okay.
Um and what just came up there was because one of there's it's full of little it just says lesson 211, do this, and you've got half a page. It says treat
Yeah.
your staff as executives.
Right.
Lesson 211, right? Um, but in terms of conclusions, so it says things like follow IE 2004 1/1,
Right.
right? And then it goes, this is why you should do it. And then the next bit is don't follow IE 2004/1. This is why you shouldn't do it. And I'm like, and it doesn't go, you must do this or you must do that. It just says, look, this is one side of it. This is another side of it.
Right.
And it's so it as treats them as having a modicum of intelligence, essentially,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
doesn't try to solve their problems for them, but rather lays out a landscape that we can participate in, and then, we get to make choices. But I
Yeah.
didn't, I didn't read this book because,
You were desperate
um,
for the conclusion. Yeah.
yeah, no, I'm like, what I need is what I wanted was somebody who kind of understood the domain that I was working in to put their arm around me and just say, look, let's have a look around the office for
Yeah.
10
Yeah.
minutes,
Yeah.
Stop what you're doing, Ted. Let's just have a little cup of coffee, you know. And that's all. And it just reminded me of that. I mean, I think I'm just really excited about this book, quite frankly.
Thank you very much. And that's been extremely helpful. Um, because I have done what I expected to do, what I hope to do. Well, the thing is, um, when I went to Edinburgh last year and didn't have a venue, and so one of the things that I ended up doing was just talking on the meadows. uh, kind of like fringe. And one of the things about that was that I realized that just talking about stuff is an extremely good way of figuring out what you're trying to say. And obviously talking to somebody is like, kind of a different way of doing that, but it's also really valuable. And so I think I've kind of figured out what to do with my account of those last three chapters, and also like what the shadow, how the commitment thing fits with its shadow. And then like I think what you've just said about, you don't necessarily have to have a kind of powerful call to action, um, is really interesting because it fits with this idea of, well, powerful call to actions sound like all the same and forever to me.
Yes,
Um,
exactly. Yes, 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 yes.
and so I've
It's like,
kind of just
I've
written,
figured it all out. Follow me, and you've got to do this, right?
yeah, exactly.
Oh,
And so I've
yeah.
just written do something. Um, and maybe that like, so that's the final call to action is something like, well, I try and characterize it, but like it's not really doing something. It's kind of like trying to encourage other people to think, to do something, think about something,
Yeah, yeah,
understand difference.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
kind of, but how
It's a
exactly you get that?
it's a like you said, it's a seduction rather
Yeah,
than a,
yeah,
you're like, if you think about these things which I am presenting to you, you know, it
yeah.
you're being seduced into a different mindset, actually.
And yeah, okay, that is great. Thank you very much. I wasn't sure how long I was going to talk to. I mean, I ended up talking for um, nearly 50 minutes. I've recorded this. Do you have any problem with me putting this online? If you do, I won't. But
No, I don't think I've said anything untoward.
okay,
So, no, that'd be great.
okay, I'll do that.
I'm all about. Yeah, it all just fell into place. I just happened to be on LinkedIn, and I was like, and you just happened to kind of go thing, and I was like, oh, and I just happened to have that window, so it was kind of
That's
really nice
yeah,
to
it's
get that opportunity.
exactly. And I haven't talked to you for ages, so it's very nice to talk to you. Let me stop the recording and then I can just